So we should be live everywhere now. Let me know if you see it, Craig.
It looks like it is on Facebook. Yes.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, then we'll get rolling. So it's that magical time of the week, everybody. It is Monday night. So for those of you out there not named Anthony Leone, you'll be excited to talk defensive fantasy football. Over the weekend, our boy Antoine decided to invite me to a Facebook group that I did not appreciate about the lack of IDP. But so be it. It isn't everybody's cup of mustard or cup of Joe or whatever you call it. How are we doing tonight, Craig?
Better than the rest of the day. This will be hopefully a nice, enjoyable recap of some stuff we've been discussing and talking about. Hopefully, we'll get some comments from people, but it'll be nice to do something fun for a day that wasn't that great.
Yeah, it definitely. It was like Office Space. We all had a case of the Mondays.
Yeah.
Paul, how are you, brother?
Yeah, same thing. I'm getting sick of doing 8 different things at the office, and it's just you want to focus on one and get one done and move on to the next, and just no. So yeah, fantasy football, and yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Oh, and it's it's
sounds
perfect. It
sounds pretty simple, but yeah.
Oh, it's a perfect time of year though for those of us that love fantasy football. I mean, rookie draft, startup draft. I mean, everything's going right now. In one chat I posted. Over the weekend there was one point where I had 4 leagues drafting from Devi all the way up to just your regular old Superflex. It was a lot. I mean, it was Mother's Day, and my kids and I did some stuff for the wife, and we were hanging out, and my wife just wanted to crash on the couch and chill out, so I snuck into the office and was refilling my Devi list so I could finish up our draft. I mean, just like all weekend, it was like nonstop, which was nice. I mean, I didn't have anything else going on. I've seen The Last Dance, so it's not like there's any sports that I want to watch. So, it's a good time of year. Definitely a fun time of year, and tonight's show is going to be different. I know the last few weeks, for anybody that has been watching regularly, we've been talking kind of our top 10s. We've also done some rookie recaps. Tonight we're going to tackle a subject that is kind of polarizing, and that's IDP scoring. So tonight's going to be filled with just a conversation about a type of scoring that we think really balances offensive and defensive. Because the issue that I always run into, and I was telling the guys before, and we've had this conversation plenty of times, that I don't have any 2 IDP leagues that are alike when it comes to scoring. They all have variations. And the thing that I always try to get the leagues to vote on is a way to balance it. I want my defense to be just as valuable as offense, and I want the defense to have every position starting. I want people to have to do their research and be ready to start a corner and a defensive tackle and not just a DB or a DL position. Guys, how do you feel about the scoring that you see in your leagues? How do you feel about the value of players? Craig, I'll start with you. Just kind of talk about IDP scoring as a whole and what you've experienced.
I've found, the main league that I'm in, that Paul and I had kind of been spearheading to get started up 8 or 9 years ago, which we're using the scoring of for discussion tonight. That was a big thing that we had wanted to do initially, and it's hard to do without having a system. And there's some out there now where you can run examples of, if I put in these scoring settings, what am I going to get based on last year's numbers, to be able to sort of contrast and compare, which is nice. We didn't have anything like that 8, 9 years ago. So creating something on our own, we ended up adding a stat later on once tackles for a loss became something more prominent. We were able to get that added in, but otherwise it stayed pretty consistent throughout. And I haven't found a good way to completely balance it out, and that's probably a good thing, unless you're in a really defensive competitive league with the owners going into it. You're not going to have a lot of people that generally think defense is as valuable, but if you can get it close to where sort of you're going to have defensive starters that can put up large numbers, like wide receiver 2 or a running back 2, that seems to be the sweet spot and relatively obtainable.
What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I think the same way. I don't want to have my LP1s be wide receiver 1s, but I want them to be like solid wide receiver 3s. and you don't want them to get overly scoring heavy, but you don't want them to be kickers either, which is why we're doing it like this versus just like having everyone play a couple kickers, because we've had a couple where that's what it seems like, and it's just not even fun. Also, on the other side of it, if you have less than 5 IDPs, basically having kickers, and that's not fun. Even if we're not doing specific corners, safety, tack, and if you got 5, you have a novelty. You don't have something that's going to be really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. My recommendation typically in the leagues that I've been in, I try to get it to where you're starting, even if you turn a couple of those positions into flexes, I definitely want to see a defensive tackle, defensive end, a couple LBs, cornerback, safety, What do you guys think is kind of the sweet spot of the roster for defensive players? So how many roster spots do you want to see filled with defensive players? And then what does your starting lineups look like if you have your way, if this is your league or if this is the league that you have control of? Kraig, what's the roster makeup and the starting roster look like for you?
Oh, boy. Well, most of the leagues that I'm in, it's trending towards Superflex. And I know that's not, for the average league out there, it isn't that way yet. Sort of like, PPR was 20 years ago or so. It wasn't the norm, but I think it's starting to trend closer that way. So for me, you're probably looking at 8 offensive starters, and you're probably looking at something similar for defense to have balanced roster spots. I'm still not finding the average even IDP league where you're going to be starting specific defensive tackles, cornerbacks. I think it's more common to have those as options that you can start by having increased scoring. MFL has a lot of that where you can create your own scoring per position. I think Flea Flicker does that too, where you can have a defensive tackle getting a tackle be worth 2 points, or a linebacker it's worth 1 point. That way it incentivizes you to start those defensive tackles, perhaps more at a defensive line spot or something. So I think that seems to be more common, but if I had my druthers, it would be something similar. I'd even go so far as I think it's fun, and there are a few leagues out there to have where you actually have to start like a real defensive setup, like a 4-3 or 3-4 or a 5-2 or whatever, and then, week to week have an actual sort of defense set up. So I'd like that personally, but I'm more of a defensive, not clearly because I'm doing this with you guys than your average Dynasty player out there.
It's definitely a world that people are. You're either hot or cold. I have one. So my home league, the league that got me into fantasy football back in '99, I think it was either '99 or 2000 when I started playing. I finally got them to do a taxi squad, group of 5 taxi squads, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Like, these are like the oldest of the old. Like, they're truthers. They don't want it to be any different. I argued night and day with them on scoring, and I brought up the IDP conversation at the same time as taxi squads, and you'd have thought I just asked for their wallets. They looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like,
yep.
So, Paul, question to you: roster makeup, starting lineups. What do you think is kind of the sweet spot for you?
Unfortunately, Craig and I's home league. We play on Yahoo, and unfortunately, most of the guys there don't want to switch, and they have a 30-man max, and you pretty much need probably 18 for offense only. So, unfortunately, we can only really start 7 defense, and I have, like what Craig said, I have a salary league RSO where you start 11 every week, and that's maybe I don't want to say excessive, because you do have to have like a tackle in there and stuff. But if I were starting one from absolute scratch, which we are, and if someone wants in on this, is hey, hit us up. I would do, and I know the one that we have is not going to be exactly like this, but I would do probably 2 defensive line, 2 backers, actually 3 of them, 2 backs, and 2 or 3 flex spots, so that way you get in there. If you want, if you have head up there, I can that you start every spot, and then you have a flex, like you do a 3-4 alignment, or like a 3-3-4-1 flex, which I like also. It just makes it more fun to not be like, all right, I'm starting the D tackle and this doesn't matter at all. But it is a grind in sitting there and saying, okay, who are the defensive tackles who actually help besides the obvious 3 or 4? It grind, and I know it's hard, but it's also super fun once you get into it as well. But I mean, I know that there's a lot out there that start thick, and okay, I'd like to see 8, 9, 10 maybe.
Yeah, it really comes down to how many people, how relevant do you want defensive players to be, which is the base thing you have to figure out when you're starting a league or when you're joining the league. And if you're having a lot of novices to defensive players, you probably are going to have just a D-line, linebacker, defensive back, your 6 players or whatever, depending on how many teams are in the league, just for people to get their feet wet and get it sorted out. But I don't know a lot of people that have started IDP and just given up on it because they hate it. I think a lot of people, you're in fantasy football because you like nuance to some degree to try to sort out, who's good, who isn't, who's going to break out, when do you need to sell. There's a lot of that opinion-based stuff that you want to be sorting out and working on, and I think there's a lot more of that. There's a higher degree of it on the defensive side.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think the thing I'm okay with is if you're trying to attract people that really haven't been in the IDP world, either much or at all. Jason over on YouTube posted one of the leagues he's in. He's pretty new to IDP. Is 2DL, 1 linebacker, 2DB. I think that's fairly safe because it gives people the opportunity to kind of figure out how that works, get them comfortable, get them in, get them interested. And then from there, then you take the wheels off and you let them go crazy, starting 8, 10 positions, things like that. But I'm depending on the type of league I'm joining. Like if it's guys that are all interested in defense and very very crazy like I am, I'm fine with going 8, 10 defensive starters, add some flex. And I mean that's why when Paul asked me about the positionless defensive one, originally it had Devi in it, so I blame some of our haters in the chat to kicking rid of the Devi. I love Devi. More Devi for me. But I like the idea of trying some different things now that I've done IDP for some time and I've gotten comfortable with how I rank my guys, how I research and things like that. I think you have to have time to get comfortable with it, and then after that, then you can add more. So as the community, as people start to get interested in it, I'm perfectly fine starting with something basic, and then a few years in, voting to up it. It's not like that's the thing that I love about fantasy football is it doesn't have to stay the same. I mean, my home league is because they're all old school, and I've kind of learned to be okay with that. But that's why I do 800 other leagues that are crazy all over the place. So great call, Jason. I appreciate you posting your league format in YouTube. It's important to know that not everybody's as crazy as we are. Like some people are interested, but maybe a little afraid to jump in because it's different. Well, don't be. Find a league where it's a little bit easier to get comfortable and get used to, and find a league with people who are willing to talk and have conversations about it. That's why I enjoy being in the different chats, because I don't care. Everybody knows what I think. I mean, heck, half these rookie drafts, we go into it, and everybody knows where I'm picking Anthony McFarland, so he gets people snipe me. Like, I've had him sniped in like 5 leagues. Not that he's a defensive guy, but perfect example. You know, he's been sniped because everyone knows I like him, and you know, so
Yep.
you gotta find your niche. But IDP is a way to balance out kind of the fantasy world. Like, I think I like offensive and I like superflex and some of that, but you know, IDP adds this kind of extra level of complexity that, you know, I think fantasy needs. You know, it can only stay stagnant for so long before it gets kind of boring. So you got to up the ante.
Yeah. And none of us started off with playing
No.
10 guys. We started off with, I mean, I remember the first one I was ever in, we started 2, and you could have any position out there. And by any position, I mean, we all picked a linebacker because, well, scoring format. We
Right.
put everything the same like idiots. But yeah, we started off with 2, and then the next one, it's like, hey, let's do 6. That's like, okay, I think my feet are wet. Like, you don't hop in the deep end. You hop in the shallow end, and you work your way over.
Oh,
The same as
absolutely.
offense. You don't start in a super flex league. You start in your generic just redraft league, and then you go, hey, Dynasty. And you go, all right, now we're playing defense. It's the same thing. You start in the shallow end, you move over.
And that's why I try not to make, you know, most of the leagues I'm in, I try not to make a ton of changes at once, because you know, you can continue to change and develop and grow. You know, maybe one year I'll try to add different types of scoring, or one year I'll add different positions and maybe try to change something into a flex. I mean, it's, you know, it doesn't have to be all at once. You know, it just keeps it interesting. So, okay, so now that we've spent, you know, 20 minutes talking about kind of roster makeup, I am in line with you guys. I like having a starter at each position. You know, DE, DT, 2 linebackers, corner, safety, and then a couple flex spots. I think that's kind of the sweet spot, because then you can have a little fun with your roster makeup. You know, if you're a big fan of safeties, you can have a couple extra safeties because they flex guys or linebackers or whatever. You know, and I'm seeing it in drafts. You know, all the leagues I have drafting right now, except for one, are IDP, and I'm seeing people that are taking, you know, like Javon Kinlaw is going a little earlier because guys really value that DT position and they kind of think he's the next Buckner in San Francisco, or you know, or people are going high after Jordan Brooks because they listen to Paul and seem to think he's the next big thing. You know, whatever the case may be. So
I've
you know,
gotten sniped on him so many times, and I just look around like I helped start that. Oh, and one other thing that we didn't mention, all which is actually really sad because all of us are in this league, and we said flex. We do one league where it's corner, safety, back as a flex, tackle, and line as a flex.
mhm.
So you don't have to necessarily have a flex be anything. You can have a flex be position specific also, which I really like that league because of that. Other than the fact that every 6 months I make a trade that just in hindsight is just not smart. But that's off subject on that one. Uh, but you can make a flex whatever you feel like. All right, we're doing a flex that's not a backer because score the most in this league. Excellent. If that helps balance it out for you, that's all we're looking for. That's all we're looking for.
Fun fact is, I was looking, you know, so obviously I wasn't at the beginning of that league, so I wasn't part of the inaugural draft. So over the weekend, just for the fun of it, I looked back at the first round of the draft, that the initial draft was like, don't worry, Paul, you're not the only one making terrible decisions on draft day. You know, seeing David Johnson in the first round, seeing Todd Gurley in the first round. And this is just a year, you know, it was a year or two back, you know.
Oh, and Gurley in the first.
I think he was
I
the first
respect
pick,
for-
too.
Oh, I respect the individual who drafted him. This is the worst that was one of the worst selections I've ever seen that owner ever make. And he knows I respect him, but that selection, I'm just like, oh no.
And that's the tough thing. You know, when you're doing a startup, your first few picks can either make or break kind of your first couple years in the league, because you're really setting yourself up. And most of the first round picks, I was like, ooh. In hindsight, those guys probably weren't happy with that. I mean, I was like, well, I guess I am thankful I came in with a dumpster fire of a team that I was just going to blow up anyway. So, like, most of these people, you know, probably
Yeah,
will get there soon too.
your first two picks in the league were Gurley and Hunt.
Yeah, I mean, Hunt at least has opportunity if he can get his head out of his butt, and Gurley, if he can stay on the field and survive another year or two, that'd be great. I'm sure. You know, the owner will probably be happy about that, but you know, so I mean, like we say countless times, we don't know nearly half as much as we think we know. You know, that's the fun thing about fantasy. I mean, you know, especially, you know, so obviously in this league it's got Devi, so I was looking back through Devi and I was comparing it to other leagues that I'm in. You know, some of the guys that we're drafting in the second, third, fourth round, guys aren't touching, or you know, I mean, kind of vice versa. You know, I mean, you go into it, if you love your draft and you like who you picked, so be it. I mean, that's the important thing.
And even if you hit on him, some of us are drafting Chase Young, hoping that he doesn't get drafted into a 3-4. Like that's not smart. That's just luck at that point. Like you're just hoping on some of these guys. Like,
absolutely.
Hey, Chandler Jones, he's now a 3-4 backer. Like, oh, seriously?
Come on.
No.
Yeah,
Khalil
I mean,
Mack went from like D end, I don't know, top 3 overall, to now he's just not a startable player, and it's just like seriously, like that's like it's the Andrew Luck hangs him up on August the 1st, and you just go, but it was the scoring format, and there's just nothing that you do about it. And that can be frustrating also for someone who doesn't have any experience. Heck, I have experience. I still hit my head against things when that happens.
oh, and that's the tough thing. And the other part of it is what, depending on the fantasy site you use, they can button hook you. You know, if they designate a guy a D end or a linebacker, I mean, you know, or they allow you to flex it and kind of change it. I mean, it can be very frustrating, especially on the IDP side. I mean, obviously on the offensive side, scoring and you know the scheme that a player goes to could be a problem, but you see it much more apparent in IDP. You know, especially when you're moving guys from a 4-3 to a 3-4, things like that. So you know, I give props to anybody who tries harder and goes deeper in doing IDP and Devi and some of these things that are not the norm, because you're really challenging yourself, and I think that's always important. You have to challenge yourself.
Yeah. If you want a solid challenge, just do Devi, and then look at how you had your order from even 12 months ago, 24 months ago. You will look like an idiot fast. Everyone's looks just like, wow, what were you thinking?
Well, absolutely. I mean, especially when you're putting, you know, I mean, at this point now you're guessing even more. These are kids that are fresh out of high school. I mean, you're asking a lot of them to develop into something, and trying to figure out who's going to. I mean, we don't know all the facts about the individual. We're just guessing and using kind of the eye test. So, but we digress a little bit. You know, we figured the show would go a little quick because it's IDP scoring specific episode. So rabbit trailing doesn't bother me that much. So we've talked about roster makeup, kind of what we think a sweet spot for your IDP roster looks like. As a not fresh-faced IDP owner, as well as somebody who's fresh into IDP, you know, things change a little bit over time. So now I want to get into the actual scoring specific. To set this up for anybody who watches it either currently, thank you for those that are watching currently, or those that come after and watch us on YouTube. We had a conversation as the three of us. We sat down and kind of talked about, you know, Paul threw up kind of the scoring that he really liked, and we kind of had that conversation, and I think it really balances offensive and defensive scoring nicely. So we're going to talk through just the defensive side of the scoring. If you guys have questions about how we do the offensive side, find us on Facebook or Discord and ask us, or Twitter. Except for Paul, he doesn't have Twitter.
That's right.
So, all right.
I'm on here. Ask me here.
Right, yeah. Come on here and ask, or find us on Facebook, find us on Discord. As you see it on our scrolling banner along the bottom, if you want to get a hold of us, that's how you can find us. So we're just going to I'm going to run through it real quick, and then you guys can kind of talk about some of the finer points, and we'll go from there. So a solo tackle, 1 point. An assisted tackle, half a point. Sack, 3 points. INT, 5 points. Forced fumble, 3 points. Fumble recovery, 5 points. A defensive scored touchdown, 6 points. A safety, 5 points. A defended pass, 1 point. A blocked kick, 5 points. Tackle for loss, 3 points. And an extra point that's returned, 2 points. The thing that's nice about this is it values some of those kind of big play things in a big way. You don't see a ton of safeties, defensive touchdowns, blocked kicks. So if you do get that in a game, that can be huge. You don't get them often, so they get a little bit of a higher point. And I think that's a big deal. So Paul, I'll start with you because you kind of threw this scoring up, and then we'll go to Kraig, and we'll go from there. But Paul, talk about the scoring. Let me know the things you'd like, don't, things like that, just overall.
I can't take any credit. I mean, I screenshot this from a league that Kraig and I have been tweaking for a decade now. There's some credit there, but I mean that's a team effort on that one. I just like the fact that under this format, your LB1s are scoring probably 15 every week. Maybe a little less than that, and therefore they're just basically added flexes for offense for as far as how you receive them. I mean, you can still find decent options if it's Sunday morning and your guy has a issue and he's not out there. All right, you're going to get your 6 or 7, and you move on, but it's going to hurt. I guess I like this because you do have these sack artists who actually matter at the end of it, versus if you just have a sack be worth 2 and you don't get the TFL, then everyone who plays on the edge, they don't really matter at the end of the season or at the end of the week unless they got like an interception that they shouldn't have, or whatever. It actually helps you get those TFLs that change games, and it helps it so that everyone really matters at the end. I mean, I don't know. I hit on sacks and TFLs. I mean, I'll let Kraig hit some of the secondary options because he was the one who thought most of that one through. But you have it so that it's not the guy who plays up the middle of the field is the only one that you want in fantasy. I mean, you do prefer the guys up the middle, but it's not like you can't play TJ Watt and he's never going to see the field despite him as one of the top 10 edge asset in the NFL, top 5 maybe. You want to actually matter for fantasy. And like I said, I'll flip the other half of this over to Kraig because he's the guy who thought about some of the more secondary scoring stats versus what I did.
So when we set this up, we didn't have tackles for a loss. That wasn't an option, I don't think, in the system that we have here. We added that later on, and that was a big vote in the league, one that we actually did end up voting on. The league has had a lot of turmoil, and me being the commissioner, I get to deal with all of it, so it's kind of fun and infuriating. But My rationale for having wanted to add a tackle for a loss is, to me, and clearly most of the league felt the same way. It's the same thing as a sack, really. I mean, you're getting a player behind the line of scrimmage. We assign a sack to someone who's playing quarterback because we value quarterbacks. The NFL values quarterbacks more highly, but in terms of actual NFL play, it amounts to about the same sort of thing. So getting that added in there did balance things out a lot for those edge rushers and those defensive linemen, which we had wanted to do. And again, kind of like Brad pointed out when he was going through it, a lot of the big plays in the NFL that don't happen as often have more value assigned to them to try to give that scoring boost. And one of the nice things that I've been able to do through Yahoo system is backtrack and keep track of all the things. So to give you guys an idea, the highest scoring defensive players in this system each week got up to as high as 46.5 points one week. Aaron Donald went off. So, you're having a lot of points there, but at the same time, the highest scoring offensive player we've ever had was a little over 60 one week, which was a quarterback, of course. And 1 week years ago, Peyton Manning went off. So it isn't completely equal like we had talked about at the beginning, but there is that thing where, if you have a truly elite defensive performance 1 week, it can sway your matchup. And I think that's important because one of the ways we set up this league is we kind of wanted it to reflect the NFL in that way. If we were adding defensive players and giving them value, great defensive performance can turn a game just like a great offensive performance. So it's not completely equal, but there is that thing where, having someone score 30 points a game on the defensive side happens a good number of times a year. And, that's not the highest that someone's going to score each year. To give you an idea, no. Just going off of last year's stats, the highest scoring defensive back was 168, defensive lineman was 163, and linebacker was 192. So that linebacker, kind of like Paul had said, balancing it out was T.J. Watt. He was at 192.5. But then you had Jordan Hicks, who's kind of the complete opposite in terms of how they're played and what they give you on the defensive side. He got you 191 points. So it's really even with those two different sort of scoring styles with those top-end options, which we kind of wanted to get that done. And even, it's not just the top guys when you're doing to number 10, so it's still a top 10 option, but you're looking at 163, 134, 130 points a game. So, it does filter down. It isn't just those top guys that are sort of evened out throughout the defense with this. It's throughout the positions, which we try to want to give that value to.
Well, I think that's the important thing. I mean, in the end, you want your scoring in your league to be set up in such a way that people are valuing, and really trying to find value in some of these other players. I mean, if you'd asked me pre-show kind of where Jordan Hicks would have fallen in this spectrum, I wouldn't have guessed him to be that high. So that I think that really does make you think about it. So,
as far as an IDP basic, one of the things, there's a few things that you want. Ideally, they should be on the field a lot, which usually means that the team isn't that good. And I'm not ripping the Cardinals, but they selected first last year because they weren't very good. And even when they had the new staff in there, they had Kyler in there, they still finished with, 4 wins, 5 wins. And you can see the upside, but you want guys who are on the field, which means that they're good enough that they actually play and that they're on just horrible teams. One of the reasons I like Shaq Thompson is, yes, I'm a Bridgewater fan. I think he will be fine in the league, but he is what he is, and they're going to see the field frequently. So one of the things that's just basic is you want someone who's on the field, and they can either be good because they're talented, or they're somebody who plays for Cincinnati, and they're the only thing they have up the middle, so they play snaps by default, which means that the other team is looking at him and going, all right, this guy's not very good. We're throwing it over here. And then you get the solo, and you're the only one who scores on that, despite there being 9 other guys better. But you get the point. It feels cheap, but you have to look at it also, because scoring is scoring. It all counts the same.
Well, and that's the challenge. I mean, on the offensive side, you don't necessarily. I mean, the offense has a lot of options because of the way scoring's set up. You know, wide receivers, there can be lots of guys because of injuries, because teams are more spread and they're going 3 and 4 and 5 wide more frequently, things like that. You know, so having that on the defensive side where other guys are going to get some action either because they're really good or because their team's really bad. I mean, it balances out, but ultimately what it does is it challenges you to do your homework and do your due diligence on guys. I mean, that's why we've talked up, you know, some of those Cincinnati linebackers, because we know they're going to get action, and even if the team's getting better, they're still going to be on the field a ton, you know, things like that. So the nice thing is that the one thing Rick can never say is he's never gotten a show done in under an hour. We will get a show done in under an hour. But before we close out, you know, I just want to make sure you guys have had a chance to say everything you want to say about scoring, about roster breakup, anything IDP, kind of the administrative side of IDP. Kraig, I'll start with you. Is there anything else you wanted to add to the conversation that people need to think about?
I think, and we talked about it a little bit, but you really need to make sure that you find a league that fits what you're looking for. You know, if you're not really into the minutia of it, or if you're just learning, there's a whole lot of leagues out there that have your basic DL, linebacker, defensive back positions out there where you can plug and play 1 or 2 guys each and learn and go. And if you get comfortable with it and that's just how you want to be, great. But if you want to find a way to value defensive players more, you can start by, you know, tweaking your scoring system. If you're fine with that, with the league that you're in, or, you know, you can tweak it down to, like we had said at the start, in our league, we discussed the scoring system of doesn't have it, but tweaking that to make a defensive tackle more balanced on average versus a defensive lineman versus a cornerback versus a safety. There's ways to do that with the, you know, different systems that are out there. Find what suits you, because like you said, Brad, on offense, it really is sort of, I don't like to say this because I'll probably get yelled at by people, but it is sort of bland. There is just sort of your average, you know, you can go into running backs, get X per catch versus a wide receiver versus a tight end. You know, tight end premiums becoming more common, but that stuff still isn't the norm. And that offensive side of the ball is just so ingrained out there. You know, you have your Matthew Berrys of the world that just make a living off of talking about those offensive players, you know, year round. That's what they do, and that's great. But that's just sort of the norm for the vast majority of people out there. And once you get to the defense, once you make that shift over to that side, and probably Devy even more so, and we're not going to get into that tonight, you know, you can really go down the rabbit hole. And if that's something that you want to do, go out there and find it. Because you can go on Twitter, tag a bunch of people, and find a league that suits you. Go to the Roto Heat website. You can find ways to contact us. Go to the Facebook page. Go to Discord. There's always leagues starting. No matter what you're looking for, you can find something. And I think that's just figuring out what you want and going out and getting it. But as far as defense, find what you love. Because if you're playing defensive football, don't just get into something basic and stay there if it's not challenging you and you don't like it, because you can find something better.
Absolutely. And I like Jason over on YouTube put this out there, and I think it's something that does have some weight in some, definitely a lot of league types. He says, I picked up IDP studs on waivers besides one, Nick Bosa. He's picked up TJ Watt, Buda Baker, Chandler Jones, Matt Crosby. There's usually always options for IDP compared to offensive assets, especially when you're in some of your newer IDP leagues. You're going to see a lot of guys left out on waiver wires that, you know, probably shouldn't be because they're really talented. So there's definitely, you know, you have that opportunity. I mean, even so, to use our league for an example, you know, post draft, I mean, I spent all of my rookie picks except for my top 2 on Devy guys. So there's plenty of IDP options that I'm going to go try to get out there on the free agent market, because we all went Devies or some of the higher end rookies. So, depending on the type of league.
Don't you dare.
What are you saying, Paul?
I'm saying that may be where I have spent my waiver money too.
You have to put more than $50 on Jordan Brooks, is what he's saying.
That's fine. Spend your $200 on Jordan Brooks. That'd be fine. I'll just say that I've spread the wealth a little bit. I've definitely put some money on a lot of different options. And that was the funny thing. When we got done with the draft, I looked back over the play. I'm like, wow, these guys didn't get drafted. So I look back at the draft. I'm like, wow, these guys really didn't get drafted? Well, I got to try to get them then. So so depending on your league type, there are plenty of options that may or may not be floating out there. And even that, depending on how deep your IDP league goes, you could have guys post-draft that are out there that you go pick up and stash on your taxi squad or some of those things. So, don't fret if you blow up your draft and you don't do it as well as you probably should have. Especially from the IDP side, that's why we talked about and specifically a few weeks back we talked about when we combined offensive and defensive, where most of these guys start to fall down. Especially rookie-wise, we talked about Chase Young kind of being in the middle of the second round. Because offensive guys are always going to outweigh value-wise your defensive guys in drafts. So, just to put that all in perspective and to think about that as you're going through your drafts, whether it's a startup or a rookie draft, IDP always slides down. They don't normally start getting picked up till later in your drafts. And that's okay. I mean, it's just kind of the nature of the beast at this point. I don't think that we found that sweet spot to where IDP is as valuable as offensive, and I don't think we ever will. Paul, final thoughts on this? Anything you want to add?
One thing we didn't mention is, I know we hit on roster size, but when you start offense, let's say you're starting quarterback, and let's even say it's a super flex. So, okay, two of them, your running backs will make that 4, receivers will make it 7. Tight end 8, and a flex 9. So let's say that's your starting. You have 24 roster spots in your normal league. The math there is not overly hard. About 2.5 guys for every starting spot. Now, I'm not saying you should have that for defense, but maybe 1.5, 2 maybe. So, and I know that this is one of the things that gets Kraig also, is that Yahoo only has 30 roster spots. You kind of can't run a good defensive league with them. You probably want to have, like I said, if you're starting 8, 9, maybe you mentally have 8 guys, so 20 guys for defense only.
Yeah,
and then if you have offense and you do 30 only, then you're at 50 suddenly. Yeah. So that's something that you want to think about also. Now, if you have your generic, I don't know, let's say it's 5. Let's say you start 1 back, 2 backers, and 2 guys on the line, then maybe you only do have 10 roster spots that you use for them, and you can use that for different. I'm not familiar with what ESPN is, but you can do Yahoo for that. That's another thing that you want, and say, hey, we're starting this up. All right, well, how many spots should we add on? It's not a how many starters only is it. Because otherwise, then you don't. If someone who gets hurt, you don't want guys who get hurt, and all of a sudden you go, okay, Wagner's out for 3 weeks. Do I release him? Yeah. You don't want that either. Mm-hmm. So just something you want to think about when you start a league up like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, typically,
regardless of the size.
Well, and platform is critical. if I'm using Yahoo, ESPN, something like that, typically that's for like redraft type stuff in my mind. I don't know that I've ever ran a dynasty on any of those platforms, just because of kind of the cap in your roster size, and it really does limit you long term on what you're doing. Flea Flicker, MFL, those are kind of the big ones. I haven't dabbled in Sleeper yet, but I plan on trying to find a way to do a league in Sleeper just so I can get used to the system. Even if I don't like it, I still like to have leagues on all the different platforms so that I'm familiar with them and have some sort of familiarity with it. So, definitely platform and being careful of some of those things. I definitely encourage having spots. Even just 2 spots for injured reserve type situations, I think is always important because you can lose a critical starter and you don't want to have to drop him to pick up somebody to replace him for a couple weeks. There have been leagues that I don't have that in where I'm like, I'll just take the 0 at his position then if I can't fill it, because I'm not dropping one of my key contributors just because he's out for a couple weeks because he's got turf toe. So so good call. Great Paul. Good call. I appreciate Jason and the folks over on YouTube and everybody that's been hanging out. Tonight's episode was going to be a little shorter, but we wanted to kind of talk nuts and bolts administration of IDP leagues specifically. We thought this would be a perfect time to bring it up because you are in your rookie drafts, your startup drafts. I mean, this is the season of drafting, so we want to make sure that you get going on the right foot with your IDP leagues and set yourself up for success, just from the administration side of things, your scoring and formats. So, if you guys have questions, make sure you find us over on Facebook, on Discord. Paul, I don't know if you've been paying much attention, but you have a Twitter handle today. One of our Facebook users made sure that we said that, and it was perfectly fitting because of the shirt you're wearing, what your Twitter handle says.
I'm afraid to ask, but lay it on.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were actually watching. It's #FSU sucks.
Is that Rick or who is this?
Well, I don't know the Facebook user, but I will say that we only have one guy that does graphics for us.
Yeah.
And I don't mean gifts from Kraig.
No.
Coffee?
No, it was Rick.
Okay.
We figured we'd have a little fun with you tonight, which you were perfect because the hat and the shirt, I was like, as soon as it got on, I don't know if you noticed me kind of blushing. I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to contain it the whole show, but.
If you want to go on Twitter and use that hashtag, and then @RotoHeatRick, just go ahead and send a whole bunch of love his way.
Yeah. Just make sure and put Willie Taggart in front of it. Don't worry, we all hated him.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, hey, Joss Whedon over on YouTube. Look at that. Glad to see you're here, Joss. He says he always needs help on the schemes that will have OLB thrive and who. So in these scoring formats, did you guys take into account the outside linebacker position, and how do is there a way to really help those guys out?
I mean, here's the thing. You can't really separate from a fantasy perspective the middle from like the Sam. You can't really say, all right, well, we're playing one guy that plays Sam because, I mean, you have the actual NFL franchises arguing about defensive end or backer when guys get tagged. You can't argue, but I mean, you can't sit there and go, okay, you have to have a Sam for this. Like,
right.
That's just too hard. But one of the things that makes edge from guys who play up the middle is you add for TFLs, and it's not like if you play up the middle, you're never going to have TFLs, but you do have the stretches that they get strung out and the backer shoves them out and they get TFLs off of that. That's one way of evening it out. And like we said before, we had an edge as LB1 this last year, and you had someone who plays exclusively up the middle basically neck and neck with them the whole season. So, I mean, I don't want to say, hey, ours is the best, yada, 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 but we've at least figured out how to even things out a little bit. I wish that we had some sort of a corner safety for this, but we don't have guys in that league who are necessarily up for it. But I think we've at least found an option to even things out, and this is through our own trial and error, and we've had errors a lot on it, and we've learned from it, and we move on.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of, support that, the Steelers, we had 3 Steeler linebackers in the top 10 in this scoring format. Now, they were offensively challenged last year. We already talked about you're going to want your guys to be on the field a lot on defense to have more opportunities. But you had Watt at 192, you had Bush at 163, and you had Dupree at 166. So, I mean, you had 2 outside linebacker edge types there, and you got the guy sitting in the middle, and they're all, points per game about the same. It's sort of the same thing. Shaq Barrett was up around 190, and you had Levante David at around 160. It's about the same. They're on the same team, but they're playing 2 completely different positions, and they're getting you points in a completely different way. And I think a big part of it is, people always look at sacks, and because they're the big stat that everyone loves to see on defense along with interceptions, I don't think a sack is the same value-wise on the field, nor in fantasy football should it be as an interception. But if you want to be giving it more weight to even things out like we did, you got to be looking at getting a tackle for a loss too, because that isn't only going to be your edge guys. Your guys up the middle are going to be able to, if they have a good defensive line, to get off those blocks and make some plays, in the middle of the field behind the line of scrimmage to sort of even that out where you're not just giving it to those edge guys. So finding out, those defensive setups where they're on the field a lot. It's the same thing. Chandler Jones was around 180 in this, with you had Hicks around 190. Again, 2 completely different guys, but the commonality between these 3 teams, although Tampa Bay was different why they were on the field a lot, they scored a lot, so they just put their defense out there. But if you find those setups where you're going to have guys out there a lot to have those opportunities, you can find a balance of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and okay, so sorry, Josh. It looked like his question kind of was more when it comes to player scouting and acquisition, kind of how do team schemes, how do NFL team schemes and where outside linebackers thrive. And the tough thing is you want to look at least my opinion, you want to look at most of the league sits in dime packages a lot. Or nickel, not dime, nickel packages a lot where you're having just 2 linebackers on the field. So you kind of want to look at those snap counts, see, how, say, a team like the Steelers or the Cardinals or somebody who's kind of a 3-4 team, how they deploy their nickel packages. If you're doing nickel and it's just kind of your inside, one of your inside linebackers, so whoever your speediest, best range inside linebacker, and then who your kind of safety 3 is, who's not good enough to be on the field regularly, but good enough to kind of play down in the box. Those are kind of guys that tend to get it over your outside linebackers who are purely edge rushers, sack artist type guys. So, at least in my opinion, Jaws, you have to look at how the team deploys those packages, because those, a lot of teams, you're starting to see them be 50, 60% of the time sitting in that package where it's hurting your linebackers because they're not on the field. Paul, what's your take on that? So when you're out looking for outside linebackers, how are you kind of looking at the player talent versus the actual team scheme and things like that?
As far as from like a drafting perspective, you have to walk into it thinking there's going to be 5 guys at every spot who you are going to think in August that, all right, this guy will never ever make my team, and by the middle of October you go, all right, I feel solid about starting him week in, week out. You're going to have 5 of those at every position every single season. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're good. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're horrible either. You can have, I remember this is probably 07, 08, where, and this was in the middle of the Oakland is horrible stretch. They had somebody named Kirk Morrison, who was slow, not very good, but he was all they had. And because he was all they had, he racked up something like 160 solos or something, and once he just something uber high. And then he went to the Bills and he never saw the field. So I don't necessarily look at it from a, hey, here's who's like scheming specific, but you look for that, and then you also look for the queens. And like we said in prior episodes, they're always on the field, and they move around the field very, very quickly. And those are the assets that you want because they see the field for just so many more snaps. It'd be like a receiver who, or it's like a running back who's touchdown dependent. You don't want that because they have to score when they're on the field. I don't want to say that your guys have to score when they're on the field. That seems obvious, but you can walk in to interceptions if it gets deflected and you're just on the field. Well, you're on the field, so you have a shot at scoring. You also want those queens who are just always on the field with the snaps. And that's, but you can also make it with starting guys who are horrible that just get solos because they get thrown at every single snap. So I know it seems odd, but I want as many queens as I can get my hands on. And then you kind of filter in the guys who are only good because of the situation as well, because they play for Washington. The Jaguars' other backer besides Schobert. I'm not saying that these guys are horrible athletes. I mean, they're in the NFL, but you want guys who are on the field a lot. And that's somewhat how I look at building it. And I know that that's not a scheme-specific answer, but you want snaps. I know that's a long-winded answer also, but sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the short version of that to me is just flexibility. If you're an outside linebacker, there's two ways to stay on the field. Are you going to be an edge rusher, like someone like Chandler Jones that could go put his hand down in the dirt and still get the sack for you? Or are you someone that's able to go back into coverage and stay with a tight end or someone so you're not taken off the field? So if you're looking at an outside linebacker that isn't really able to do one of those two things, he's not going to be out there as often, and availability is the name of the game. How much is he playing? How much is he out there? And then what is he doing? So if you can find a guy that's an outside linebacker that's either going to put his hand on the dirt or be rushing on those third downs or go back into coverage, pass deflection and most of the time is the same as a tackle scoring wise. So for fantasy purposes, if you can do either one of those as an outside linebacker, I mean, that's pretty much what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Two down thumpers are not what you want.
Yeah, no, they're not going to get you much by way of lifetime value and points. Good question, Jaws. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight. I know, administration and scoring and all that isn't always the sexiest topics, but if you set it up properly, your league is more enjoyable. People have a lot more fun, and things can be, it can have a better longevity and health to it because people will want to stay because of how you handle things. So we do also, because I'm sure Rick's still out there, we do also want to say it was a team effort, Paul, to mess with you tonight. So yes, Rick may have done the dirty work, but the rest of us are back behind the scenes telling the kid to lick the frozen pole. So I appreciate you being a good sport about it.
As usual, I look forward to absolutely destroying him in the league I'm in with him. Maybe not the first year, but I will destroy you.
he's going to do everything he can to take you down. Oh boy, well that's fun. We like that. So thank you guys for hanging out tonight. Kraig, Paul, as always, it's a pleasure hanging out and chit chat with you, men. It's always fun to spend Monday nights with you. And don't forget tomorrow night, Tuesday night offensive live stream. We'll be talking about some fun stuff as well. I don't know exactly what off the top of my head because I'm not paying attention to what the schedule looks like. But be back tomorrow, 9 o'clock over here on YouTube, Facebook, all that good stuff. Come chat with us. Come have a good time. Don't forget to check us out Facebook, Discord, Twitter. Kraig and I are over there on Twitter. We're pumping out content like crazy. Make sure you go to rotoheat.com. If you're interested in joining IDP specific leagues, talk to us. We're actually trying to fill something that's a little bit more unique from IDP. So let us know if you want to jump in. We would love to have some fresh blood join the IDP leagues with us. So for the guys, for the rest of the Rotary team, you guys have a great night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.